Okay, this topic about warfare in the Americas, especially in North America, comes up every once in a while when people are asking me questions. And when I write my reviews of different arrowheads, it's turning out that many of my assessments and my opinions are leaning more toward the warfare aspect as opposed to the hunting aspect when it comes to stone points. Okay, so I just want to explain my reasoning why that is. Through my research, I have found that a lot of these long points that are made of stone have been found with remains as cause of death. Okay, that's one thing. And number two, they break extremely easily, and it's always perplexed me, or it's always been confusing. Why would you use a point that's so easily broken and so delicate for hunting, especially large game, which they were used for sometimes? You do find delicate arrowheads in remains of buffalo and so forth, especially I have experience in my area. There are those types of points. So they were obviously used in hunting, yes, but I think it was just incidental that they were used that way. The main purpose, I think, for these delicate, long needle tip points for arrows are for warfare. I would say 90% of the time. And since you have them in your quiver and you see some game, you go after the game with the same arrows that you're using for warfare. But in general, I think it solves the issue or the question: why would these arrowheads be so delicately made, so carefully made, and so strange looking in some cases, when all you need is a simple triangle to shoot a deer with, or to shoot a buffalo or whatever. You don't need all these. You don't need this ceremonial looking thing on your arrow to shoot an animal. Okay, so that's two reasons, right? One is because of the remains, cause of death, especially with scalorn points in my area. They're a major cause of death in the burials. But there's many delicate types. There's perdiz, there's toya and stuff in my area, and I assume in other areas of the country of North America you can find very delicate points, like out in the West Coast, all the way up the coast, and then some areas on the East Coast as well, long Fort Ancient points, I think, that are very delicate, easy to break, and so forth. Sometimes I get a question on how these were stored, if they break so easily. I think what happens is they're stored separately. They're not mounted on the arrows until you go on campaign, until you know you're going to go into a warfare situation. Then you mount the arrow heads onto the arrows, and then you go and fight. All right, and then after the fight, I would assume that they would remove the arrowheads from their arrows and store them again. Okay, because you can't have them banging around inside the quiver. I've tried it myself, and the tips always break off you can just walk a little bit with your quiver back and forth, maybe a mile or so of walking, and all the tips are broken off. So they cannot have been stored that way. You know what I mean? Unless each arrow had a little cover for each arrowhead, then you could store it in the quiver. Maybe it was done that way, I don't know. But the pictures I've seen from Europeans that have made illustrations when they first make contact with Native Americans was they would hold the arrows in their hand, okay, with the bow, and you can see 2 or 3 arrows, and then one held at the ready, and sometimes one held in the mouth during warfare. Okay, so as you can see from that type of illustration, that the arrowheads were not touching anything. They were not in the quiver. If you hold them in your hand, the points can be arranged so that they don't touch each other. You know what I'm saying? If you have 3 or 4 arrows in your hand with the bow, the tips are not going to be touching each other. And if you have one mounted or one ready to go and one in your teeth, all these points are not touching anything. Okay, so that's another thing. The way that they're illustrated in warfare illustrations lends credence to the idea that these can be used as long as you're very careful with them for warfare. Okay. I think that's it. We can have more of a discussion in the comments. Trying to think of what other... I did read some studies that I'll share with you later on, I guess, on the Hohokam points, because I'll be working on those, where the migration or colonial period of that culture influenced the size of the points. During the time where the Hohokam expansion occurred, they were using very long, delicate points. And I assume that was because of warfare. They had to fight when they moved into their new areas. And then after they were in the area for a while, the points became smaller. Which I assume it was because either they lost most of their flint knappers or skilled flint knappers after the fighting, or they just didn't need to, didn't feel the need to use these more lethal arrowhead types. Okay, because it is lethal when you use a very long, sharp, very needle tip point. When you shoot someone with that, it can cause an infection, not only pierce easily, but it can cause an infection because it does penetrate so deeply, and it will often penetrate bone as well, and cause a lot of pain and inflammation and stuff. And that's a pretty nasty business when it comes to doing the research on this kind of point. Okay. So yeah, that's it. I've been wanting to do testing on these types of arrowheads for a long time, and again, the stumbling block for testing is to get a good medium. I don't want to... I was all set ready to go using some pork ribs and pork skin to try to shoot that, but I would have to waste a lot of meat, you know what I'm saying? And I'm very conscious about not wasting animal products for testing in this way. Yeah, I can go through and I can pick out the little pieces of flint and stuff that get stuck in the meat, and then make a broth and then strain out anything that might be in there. But I'm going to be ending up throwing away most of that stuff, so I've been hesitating in that respect. And ballistic gel is kind of expensive, so I haven't bought any of that. But I'll figure out something. Okay? All right.